everyone, Randy Littleson, Chief Marketing Officer at Conga, and today I am pleased to be joined by Stephen Hurrell, who is a Vice President and Research Director at Ventana Research. And today we're going to be talking about RevOps and subscription management. So to start with, many companies are in the process of shifting to or adding subscription-based revenue streams. Can you talk a little bit about the cultural and organizational best practices necessary to get this right?
Thanks, Randy. So one of the interesting things about companies who are looking to, either through acquisition, through acquiring a company that has subscription, or they're extending their own product set or introducing a new product set using subscription, is that this requires a bit of a mindset, a reset rather. Those of us who've grown up with one-time sales, with a large selling organization focused on driving revenue through incremental new business. When it comes to subscription business, that actually has to change, because the approach now has to be much more about, I have a wider group of people who are involved in that customer, because the subscription is a recurring revenue stream, i.e., it keeps going month after month after month until the customer stops buying. So what this means is that organizationally, though sales and new business development and new sales are important, you have to also recognize that the retention of that customer, to preserve the revenue stream coming from that recurring stream, but also because that customer is an opportunity to grow your business by selling more of the same or additional products and services to that customer. So this requires a reset of the thinking of the organization away from the primacy of sales and more to sales as now being a co-branch with those involved in retention, typically customer success, and those involved in expansion, typically an expansion team.
So as companies move towards mixed business pricing models, subscription, usage, and so on, there's, in addition to the organization of people, there's process and data considerations. So what have you seen is essential to master the process and data issues associated with these projects?
That's, again, another good question, Randy. And I think one of the things that companies experience, and certainly, as a consumer myself, I'm used to buying consumer goods on subscription or a mixed business model. I always like to think of the telephone. So if you look at the bill of a telephone, it's broken into various parts. There's an amortized part of the phone itself, the cost of the phone. There's a flat fee for making voice calls. Typically, a data plan has a fixed element and then a variable element. And all these different parts are actually just the one phone, but various different ways of pricing the products and services associated with it. So one of the key things about understanding this is that myself as a customer, I don't want to have to think about all the different moving parts in the sausage factory behind the scenes, as it were. So even though it's one bill, there are actually 4 or 5 different elements to that bill. And the process is concerned from the vendor side must recognize that myself as a customer, I don't want to have to, for a start, I don't want to get 4 bills for 4 different services. To me, it's one product, one service. So customers need to think about, are our processes supporting the fact that we need to present a unified front to the customer? Likewise, if I make a change to my plan, I don't want to have to wait 3 months for that to be affected. I don't want to have a different bill coming through because I made an incremental change mid-period to my plan. I need to see that all unified. So again, back on the vendor side, the vendor needs to be thinking about, how do I ensure, given the fact this is a subscription business and the customer can walk away at any moment, are my processes and is the data I'm providing allowing the customer to see that as a unified experience to encourage them to stick with me and hopefully buy more or different products that I'm selling?
So, Stephen, you alluded to this earlier, in that as companies make this shift to these more subscription and usage-based models, customer lifetime value becomes more important. And so one of the pivots that needs to happen is the customer experience moves from being a cost center mindset to actually integral in driving that customer lifetime value. How do you make that pivot? What are the best practices you've seen of companies that really get that right?
Again, another great question. In fact, this is very pertinent to the moment where I've just finished off a project with a customer, a buyer, as it were, not a vendor, but a buyer, whom, though they are a subscription business, when you talk to them, they talk about, and there's very much mental separation. I think it goes back to some of the early things we were discussing, that we have a sales team and then we have the other team. Well, that other team includes support. And in the conversations with the customer, they talk about, oh, it's a cost center. And to your point, you shouldn't think of them as a cost center. They're actually now part of the supporting revenue. So in the same way that you don't think of a salesperson as being a cost center, you think of them as revenue producing. I think you need to have that exact same thought when it comes to the support center, because it's the support center who has that ongoing relationship with your customer. The salesperson's long gone. It's the support team and the customer success team who are now engaging with your customer on an ongoing basis. And that experience is going to determine, for better or for worse, whether that customer comes back to you and renews, or, as we said earlier, goes on to buy more products and services from you. So you very much need to think about that support team, that customer success team, not as a cost center, but actually as an extension of the whole revenue team, in the same way you think of the salespeople.
So you've done a nice job of laying out the case that these teams now need to think holistically about that customer lifetime value. One of the things that many companies are considering is revenue operations as a means to coordinate all those different teams towards revenue. When should a company think about pivoting from sales operations to revenue operations, and what are the key considerations they should be taking into account if they do so?
Again, another very interesting question. So, there's a lot of ink being spilled at the moment, whether digital or written, about revenue operations and exactly what is revenue operations. And I think, to quickly answer that, revenue operations is both an approach and potentially a team. However, you don't necessarily have to have a revenue operations team to have a revenue operations approach, even though it helps. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I say that. Because as we've discussed, we've moved away from this thinking of the salespeople being the tip of the spear and everybody else is behind them, to almost like, the government, where we have three equal branches. So you actually have an equal branch now of customer success and an equal branch of expansion. But that means there are now multiple teams involved with the customer. And you've gone from a singular approach of thinking, as the sales operations team does, I'm supporting the sales organization, to now need to think about, well, actually, it's more than just sales. We've discussed customer success. We've talked about support. We haven't mentioned marketing, but marketing also has a role in communicating to existing customers about the potential for new opportunities, new products, new services. So you now need to think about, how do I align and coordinate all those different groups to ensure that they're all singing off the same hymn book, and they're actually, the targets are focused on achieving that singular aim of preserving the customer lifecycle. So in that instance, there is both a different approach in revenue operations and potentially a new team that needs to be put together. Now, that could be a virtual team. It could be, you could still have people in marketing ops, customer success ops, and sales ops operating as a single team, or you may feel in your organization it's better to have a single neck to choke, as it were, a single team running revenue operations, even though they may be segmented within that, those particularly servicing sales, those particularly servicing customer success and support, and those particularly servicing marketing, but they're all operating together against shared metrics that have been designed to ensure that you're hitting your targets for customer lifecycle success.
So nice summary of revenue operations and when it applies, when it doesn't. Another term that you hear a lot of time is commercial operations. How do you differentiate commercial versus revenue operations, and where may they both exist?
So I've been doing some research around this because, revenue operations as a term is relatively new. There's been an explosion. You only have to go onto LinkedIn and look at the number of people with, chief revenue officer in their title or revenue operations in their title. And I can assure you that versus maybe 5 years ago, there's been an explosion in those titles. However, I think what is interesting is that there has also been a title called commercial operations. And again, go into LinkedIn, you'll see tens of thousands of people with commercial operations. And, we looked at this and we did a little digging around, and what we came up with was the fact that commercial operations have existed for a number of years in particular industries. And the type of industries where it's been important are those type of industries where there is a delineation or a separation between those involved in the delivery of a product and services and those involved in the commercial operations. And I think a good example of this is healthcare, where, the chief financial officer is not providing you your healthcare. It's a doctor or it's a nurse or it's a specialist. However, that commercial side is still important, but it's divorced and separated from the actual delivery. So in those type of industries, and regulated industries are also another case, pharmaceuticals is another case, there has always existed this notion of a commercial operations as distinct from the delivery of the particular product or services. This is contrasted with revenue operations, which I think is more about those organizations, as we've talked about, of pivoting from a singular focus on sales to a more broader concept of revenue.
Stephen, thank you for the insights. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to learn more at conga.com.